Hello, welcome, and welcome back to the Patient First Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bryan Laskin, and I am super excited that you're here, and I'm excited that our special guest is here today, too. Dr. Trevor Lines of Revolutionary Tribes graduated from UOP in 2003, practiced dentistry for 20 years. Dr. Lines works with Jody Evans of Revolutionary Tribes doing business development, consulting for emerging group practices on practice level dynamics. Rev Tribes works with emerging group practices to help them create top line growth, mostly same store growth, through strategic alignment, project management, and practice level operational efficiency. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Lyons. It's great to meet you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, you and I are sort of the same dental era, and
Mhm.
you and I, it sounds like, have transitioned mainly from doing dentistry to helping dentists in one way or another. So, could you talk a little bit for the audience about kind of what took you on that journey?
That's a really great question. Yeah, so I graduated in '03. I had a private practice that did really quite well. Learned a lot in exiting that private practice actually. And then it kind of bounced around just a little bit, ended up in at Pacific Dental Services where I have been for the last 5 years. And I've enjoyed my time there. I've learned a lot about how DSOs function. And while I was there, I turned around a practice that was struggling when I got there and was doing great when I finished. I also kind of on spec started an intercompany podcast for them. I went around and tried to interview the best doctors that I could find and figure out what they were doing when they were doing well. What were their particular strengths that they were bringing, and how were they optimizing the platform? And I took those ideas and I really ramped my practice up, but I was ready to just crush it, just kill it. Had all the pieces fall in line. And then I got long COVID and I was out of practice for several months. It was my second major physical burnout during my career, my 20-year span in being a dentist. And I just kind of looked at what I was doing, what I was capable of, and how I wanted to contribute to the profession as a whole, and went, I think now's the time to look at a career transition and see how I can add value to dentistry without being in the mouth. And since then, I've been looking around, found Jody Evans at Revolutionary Tribe. She is just a joy and fantastic to work with. And for the last couple of years, she's been helping emerging groups grow. We've got some really impressive case studies and track record with some of the companies that we've worked with. And I add a voice there at the practice level, really just understanding how those dynamics function and how to optimize them. So that's a yeah, long story, long-ish, I guess.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, it's great. I mean, I hope everything's you're feeling better now, and
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, it was a long recovery. I'm still not, like, completely in the physical shape I was before. I just get like, I had a cold this last week, and it's knocked me on my butt, but overall, I'm much better than I was. For a while there, it was real hairy, but yeah.
yeah, you well, so you've been kind of on this path now of helping emerging DSOs, and it's now you piqued my interest because at Tooth Apps, the software platform that we've created, we're
Mhm,
working a lot with smaller DSOs too, and in the sort of I would say maybe a little bit more, a little bit bigger. But
mhm,
what I find is that there, it's like if you go from I've been in hundreds of dental practices, as you probably have, and
mhm,
each one is incredibly different. But if you take those differences and you go to a DSO, it seems like those differences get amplified across. So if you take a group, let's just say, if you take individual practices, there's differences between them,
mhm,
which are can be vast. But if you take group practices that have say 10 locations and you look at those, the 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 differences are exponentially more, right? And I would guess, and this is you can confirm or deny the statement that there are 10 office DSOs or groups that are absolutely crushing it, running on all 10 cylinders, let's call it.
yeah,
And then there's ones which are going the opposite direction. And there might be some in between, but my guess is that it feels like we have kind of a K curve in
It's
dentistry
got
where
kind
you're
of one
either
or the other.
crushing it or getting crushed, right? Uh,
Bimodal. Yeah, I mean, I know of 10 practice groups that are doing $70 million a year, you know? I just met one in the DSO Tech Summit last week. They have 3 practices in Southern Oregon, and they're doing well north of 10 million, you know? And so there are models out there that just absolutely kill it. And then there are some that we meet that I heard about one last week that had 7 or 8 practices, and they're operating on a 5% EBITDA, you know, and that just doesn't the math doesn't work with the amount of debt that they have there. It is a very different thing to run a single practice than running multiple practices, and the challenges of scale are unique and they're real. The ones that we see do really, really well create a high degree of alignment, and this is kind of where we come in. What customer are you serving? Like who's your target? Not only who the patient target is, but who is your target for your clinician, your team members? Does your mission resonate with them? You know, and we start there with the foundation, and then we build on that. And once you get everyone, you know, pulling in the same direction, really magic can happen, and you can create just some beautiful businesses that serve both sets of customers extremely well. And that's what we're all about. That's what I want to see kind of spread through the profession. I think we're in a really interesting inflection point in the massive phase shift of consolidation, you know, and the days of kind of EBITDA stacking are behind us, and everyone's got to kind of get their ship in order right now.
yeah, I think that's, I think we are at an inflection point in dentistry in a lot of different ways.
Yeah,
When you're talking about group practices, like you're saying, and that's not just in dentistry, it's in, software platforms too. Suddenly it's like, well, actually, revenue is important and not just growth, right? Where that hits the growth of group practices is same store growth versus just aggregating,
yeah,
right? And let's face it, I mean, it's funny because not funny, but I've been talking on the podcast sort of since the pandemic that we were going to be entering a phase of profitability compression because our wages were going up, our costs were
hmm,
going up, and our
yeah,
reimbursements were going down.
yeah.
And you don't have to be a futurist to know what's going to end up happening there, right?
No,
And patients aren't looking at it going, boy, dentistry's cheap, right? So it's harder for us to increase the fees, especially when we're getting reimbursements cut at,
yeah,
as our costs are going up too, and that's all saying the same thing that we have to focus on kind of being more efficient in practices, right?
right.
And correct me if I'm wrong. Like Richard Branson says, if you take care of your team, they'll take care of your customers, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And this is a podcast called the Patient First Podcast. And the reason why it's called that is because we're talking about the perspective of the patient,
yeah,
looking at your practice through your patient's eyes, right?
right.
And I guarantee you, if you looked at your practice through your patient's eyes, the first thing that you would look at is your team, right? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and I would take it a step further. I've always thought that one of the biggest advantages that I had as an office, whether it was with my own private practice or with PDS, was just the way that it felt to walk in the door, right? Like I've had team members that I've recruited from being temps, and they've said like I the second I walked in the door, I wanted to work there, right? And patients feel that atmosphere too. And there's something really special if you can create that harmony in the team. And the patients know it. They know that defenses are down, everyone's breathing easy, everyone's there doing the work that needs to be done. And being patient centered to me actually has always meant being team centered first. So when I look at dental practices and how they're functioning, if that healthy team dynamic is there, they are delivering the care to the patient, and that to me, the primary customer, the core focus of a DSO or even a single private practice needs to be like, how do we get these dynamics right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's funny, you probably are in a similar position to me. Like, so when you were at the tech summit, I was at the dental forums
Uh,
because can't be at two places, but they're very
yeah,
kind of not similar meetings, but relatively same
relatively,
audiences.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I would say there's, let's say there was, I don't know, 800 people at the meeting that I went to or whatever. There's probably five dentists, including me, right? So I
Mhm.
represented probably 20% of the dentists, as you were probably in the vast, vast majority being a dentist at that meeting, correct?
At the DSO Tech Summit, yeah, it was minority dentists for sure. Like there were a few of us there, but mostly it was executives of DSOs and then some vendors. That's a really interesting gathering. I was very happy that I went. It's a really intimate kind of group setting, and was able to establish some really solid connections with people.
Yeah, I've heard it's great, and we had Patrick from the Tech Summit on the
Yeah,
podcast, right?
yeah.
And from Sunset Dental, who I know, and he's a great guy. I mean, great. It's great. There's a lot of great meetings. That's the problem. There's so many,
Hmm.
right? But you know what where I was kind of going with that line is that I was I'm shocked, frankly, about how much the people in dentistry who aren't dentists, who've never were a hygienist or an assistant,
Hmm.
or don't have any connection with patient care, how much they actually care about patient care.
Yeah,
I think that there's this myth that the people who aren't involved with direct dental care don't care about patients. I've found that to not be the case at all, frankly.
yeah.
Do you agree?
Well, I mean, I think honestly, I think it
Unless
depends
you're a
on the
CFO.
unless you're CMO. I think it is a little bit dependent on the institution. I think some have higher degrees of care about what's going on than others. Some we know are a little bit numbers focused, and there's nothing wrong with being numbers focused, because if you take your eye off that ball, you can end up just dying real quick. You
Yeah.
gotta
Oh yeah.
you got to make sure that the numbers and the care are there if you're going to drive something special. Patrick was great, and I got a chance to talk with him a little bit, and he was talking about how one of their number one calls that they get is for a printer error, right? Like the printer's not working. Number one ticket that they get. And I was just saying to him, the printer is actually a really important tool, because if your printer's not working and your patient is waiting for a treatment plan, right, and they don't get the data that they need in order to have a good experience and say yes to the care, they don't end up getting the care. Like, everything has to be functional in a dental office, and Patrick was just going, yes, 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 like that's it. That's why we do what we do. Is at the end of the day, they want to make sure that the patients are getting care and that everything is functional. And I think that most people in the industry really do have a high degree of concern for how much health they're creating.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right too. I mean, you have to have your financial health in order so that you can then bring on more
Hmm.
technology
Yeah.
or have or pay your team well. So
Hmm.
it's all coming back to the team again, right?
Yeah.
Although I would say, why do you have to print stuff off? I mean,
you,
we live in. I
you,
mean, right?
you don't
You're talking to the wrong
necessarily.
guy
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah, you
printers. I
don't you
mean,
don't
so
necessarily. There
yeah,
are technological solutions for that
yeah,
don't require a printer, but in the practices that I've worked in recently, that's how they present the plans.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
So what does it mean? So going back to our groups that kind of get it and groups that don't get it, and one are being groups that focus maybe on team and the patient experience. What are some tips you can give the listeners where it's like these are some things that you might not be thinking of that really lead to putting your team first and focusing on your team?
Yeah, I think I this is a really great question, and I appreciate you asking it. The first tip that I have is get very clear about who you're serving and why. Get really clear about what your values are, and then how you're going to operationalize those values. And then once you're really, really clear about that, send up what Jody calls your purple fly tie-dye flag, right? Like you fly your banner, like this is who we serve, this is who we take care of, this is how we do it. And then the right people are going to start opting in. The other big tip here, and this is a hard one, is there's not, there's no I in team, right? And so you've got to make sure that the people that you're working with are really not individually focused, but they're really focused on how the function of the team is going, right? You got to kind of get people to opt in that check their egos at the door a little bit, and they want to move towards a greater purpose.
Mhm.
I think that those are two kind of high level tips that could help.
So how do you do that? I mean, how if I'm a dentist right now and I've got a team, this is a little bit of a leading question because but I like and I have a team and I have, let's say there's 20 people on my team,
Hmm.
and of those 20 people, I maybe there's four people that I don't know if they're not focused on the team.
Okay.
What would be your next step to kind of like address that?
So if you've got a group of 20 people, you probably have a core group of leaders in the practice, right? Like you've got the owner doctor, you've got a operations manager or office manager, and you've got a lead dental assistant, right?
Mhm.
So the first thing that you want to do is just make sure that that group is really cohesive and very tight on what they are focused on and how they are functioning, right? If you are the dentist in that particular situation, you want to take a good look in the mirror and just make sure you're not the problem. You probably are a little bit, right? Because we all have baggage that we carry over, and those are things that need to be addressed before you can really create optimal dynamics. Once you've done that, get that core group together, and then you just make sure that you are meeting in a regular cadence. Okay, you make sure the lines of communication are open. You make sure that your defenses are down, your vulnerability is high. You're saying I don't know when you don't know. You're asking a lot of questions rather than giving a lot of dictates, right? And that's a really good starting point. Once you're there, you really need to understand your model as well and how your model works, okay? And then you've got to get those three kind of core people aligned on a regular basis on what is functioning, and on at what level it is functioning or dysfunctioning in the office within the model. And these are all kind of, maybe a little fuzzy concepts, but there is a way to make these really, really tight. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you're talking about some things I think which rather than fuzzy, I'd say that they sound basic. However, I'm a firm believer that it's the basic things that often get ignored, right?
Yeah.
I used to in martial arts, like, the white belt is the most important to perfect, right?
Hmm.
And so I'm gonna restate a couple things that you said because I think it's very important. If you have barriers in your practice or in your team, the first place to look is in the mirror. I
Hmm.
could not agree more. And then make sure that you have a core group of people that you can be like what we call it is open, honest,
Yeah.
respectful communication, right?
Yeah.
But having open and honest means that oftentimes the respectful gets missed. So you got to really work on those,
Yeah.
right? And be vulnerable and check your ego at the door. I think if you have those things, there's probably that's the basis,
Hmm.
right, by which you can build everything else from, right? So I think
Yeah. Yeah.
that's great advice.
I'm a big fan of going back to the basics. You study martial arts. I think there's a quote by Bruce Lee, something like "Don't be afraid of the man that's practiced 1,000 kicks or 10,000 kicks or something like that. Be afraid of the man that's practiced one kick 10,000 times." Right? And
100%.
yeah, and there is something really really important about just nailing those basics.
Yeah, I think that's the key to to a lot of things, right? Is
Mhm.
getting the basics down. Well, what if we have like an emerging DSO leader that's listening
Mhm.
to this, or somebody that works in a DSO, that is looking to kind of align and take their practices to the next level? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is probably the best way to get in touch with you. I'm on there all the time. We actually put out a Winning Wednesdays webinar, me and Jody, where we go over a lot of these concepts. There's kind of fresh material every week, so check that out. But feel free to DM me. I'll respond, and we'd love to get you on a discovery call. See where you are, where you want to go, and how we can help you get there.
So do they just search
Trevor
Dr. Trevor
Lines,
Lines?
yeah,
Okay.
Dr. Trevor Lines, yeah, yep,
Okay, cool.
that's it.
Great. And it's much better to have winning Wednesdays than terrible Tuesdays. So
much
I think
better.
that's good.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, Dr. Lyons, it was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you very much. And thanks for what you do for dentistry.
Yeah,
Dentists. I appreciate it.
been a real pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Take care.